The sun was shining brightly that morning, casting soft golden light across the small town cemetery. It was unusual weather for a funeral, especially one for a little girl whose life had ended far too soon. People arrived slowly, walking with heavy steps, their eyes filled with sadness and confusion. Some carried flowers, some held tissue in their hands, and others simply stood quietly, not knowing what words could ever comfort a grieving mother. But no matter how many people gathered, no matter how many tears were shed, everyone's attention kept shifting to one unexpected sight. The police K-9 named Ranger, who refused to leave the small white coffin placed gently near the front. His large body was pressed against the wood, his head resting on top of it, as if he were guarding something more precious than gold. Ranger was a strong German shepherd, known throughout the town for his bravery and discipline. Children adored him, officers trusted him with their lives, and even strangers respected his calm and intelligent nature. But today, he looked nothing like the courageous K-9 they all admired. His fur lay flat, his ears drooped, and his eyes shined with a deep, heartbreaking sadness that no one had ever seen from him before. It was as if he understood exactly what had happened to the little girl, Lily, and the weight of that knowledge was crushing his loyal heart. He stayed glued to her coffin, whining softly, ignoring every command or gentle tug from Officer Daniel, the man who had trained and raised him since he was a puppy. When Daniel tried again to pull Ranger back, the dog planted his paws firmly into ground and let out a sharp, painful bark. The sound echoed through the cemetery, causing several people to gasp. Mothers pulled their children closer. Even the other officers stiffened at the unusual behavior. Daniel whispered, "Come on, boy, please," his voice breaking. But Ranger refused to move. His eyes never left the coffin, and his entire body trembled with grief. Daniel knew this was more than simple attachment. Ranger had served many years on the force, and he had attended funerals before, funerals for officers, retired K-9s, and community members. Never once had he reacted like this. Never once had he shown such overwhelming emotion. Something was different today. Something no one yet understood. The funeral began with a gentle melody played by a local violinist. The soft notes floated through the air, but even the music seemed unable to reach the heavy silence sitting over the crowd. Lily's mother, a quiet woman named Emma, stood at the front, holding a small flower in her shaking hands. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from days of crying, yet she managed to glance at Ranger with a weak, grateful smile. She knew how much her daughter had loved him. Before her passing, Lily had talked non-stop about Ranger. How he listened to her stories, how he wagged his tail whenever she appeared, how he made her feel safe even on the scariest days. Seeing him there, refusing to leave, brought Emma a strange mixture of comfort and pain. It reminded her of Lily's pure heart, full of innocence and love, always able to bond with anyone who showed kindness. People whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of the scene. Some believed Ranger was simply mourning. Others said maybe Lily had been close to him, though not everyone knew how strong their bond truly was. A few wondered if dogs could sense something more, something spiritual, something beyond what humans could understand. Ranger's behavior made many question things they had never thought about before. But no matter what anyone said, one thing remained clear. Ranger was not leaving. He pressed his face deeper into the coffin, letting out soft whimpers that brought tears to the eyes of even the toughest officers. Officer Daniel stood beside him, feeling helpless. He remembered all the years they had worked together, countless rescues, night patrols, dangerous missions. Ranger had always listened to him, always obeyed instantly, always trusted his voice. But today, command meant nothing. Today, grief was stronger than training. Daniel carefully placed a hand on Ranger's back, feeling the dog's rapid heartbeat. "I know, buddy. I know," he whispered, though he didn't truly understand. Something in Ranger's reaction bothered him deeply. It wasn't just sadness. It felt like the dog was guarding something, protecting someone, or holding on to a secret that only he knew. Children who attended the funeral stared at Ranger with wide eyes. Some wiped their tears. Others clung to their parents. One little boy whispered, "Mommy, why won't the dog leave?" The mother didn't know what to say. How could she explain a bond stronger than most people ever experienced? How could she explain the loyalty of a dog who felt emotions so deeply that he grieved like a human? The more they looked, the more it became clear that Ranger wasn't just mourning. He was waiting, watching, staying close as if trying to tell the world that Lily deserved protection even in death. As the priest spoke gentle words about Lily's kindness, bravery, and bright imagination, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked, his eyes sharpened, and he stared intensely at the crowd behind him. It was such a sudden shift in his posture that several officers exchanged nervous glances. Daniel followed Ranger's gaze, but saw nothing unusual, just townspeople, neighbors, friends, and teachers. Yet Ranger continued staring, his body tense, as if he sensed something no one else did. Then, slowly, he lowered his head again and placed it firmly against the coffin, releasing a shaky breath. The moment passed, but it left everyone unsettled. By the time the final prayer ended, Ranger's presence had overshadowed the entire ceremony. People approached quietly, placing flowers around the coffin, but they stepped back quickly out of respect for the grieving dog. Some even felt that Ranger understood Lily's death more deeply than any of them did, and in a way, they were right. While everyone mourned the little girl whose life was cut short, Ranger mourned a friend, a protector, a small companion who had trusted him with secrets no one else heard. From the outside, it looked like a dog refusing to move. But for Ranger, it was something more, an unspoken promise he intended to keep, no matter what it cost. Long before the heartbreaking funeral, before the town gathered in confusion and sorrow, there existed a bond between Ranger and little Lily that most people never truly understood. It was a bond that didn't begin with grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but with the quiet, gentle moments of everyday life, moments that slowly wove their hearts together in a way no one expected. Lily had moved into the house next to Officer Daniel 2 years earlier, bringing with her a joyfulness that made the entire neighborhood feel brighter. She was the kind of child who waved at strangers, shared her candies with other kids, and spoke to animals as if they understood every word. And Ranger, the disciplined police K-9 who usually ignored most people except for Daniel, took an unexpected liking to her from the very first day. She smiled and said, "Hi, Ranger. You're a good boy." What began as a simple greeting soon turned into a daily routine. Every afternoon after school, Lily would sit near the wooden fence that separated her backyard from Daniel's. She brought picture books, small toys, or sometimes just her backpack, and settled herself in the grass. Ranger, who normally rested quietly after training, would immediately perk up the moment he heard her voice. He walked over with slow, curious steps until he was right beside the fence. Lily giggled every time, reaching out her tiny hand to let him sniff her fingers. Soon, he began lying down next to her, pressing his large body against the fence while she read stories about princesses, brave knights, adventurous dogs, and magical worlds. Ranger listened so attentively that Lily once told her mother, "I think Ranger understands every story. He always reacts at the exciting parts." No one thought much of it at the time, but in truth, Ranger was forming an attachment deeper than anyone imagined. Over the months, their bond became a familiar sight. Neighbors passing by would smile when they saw Lily reading while Ranger wagged his tail. Sometimes Daniel watched from his porch, amazed at how gentle his tough K-9 partner became around the little girl. Ranger, who could chase down criminals and protect officers fearlessly, transformed into a soft, patient guardian whenever Lily appeared. She braided ribbons into his collar through the fence, and though Ranger hated wearing decorations of any kind, he allowed it only because she did it. When Lily baked small dog treats with her mother, Ranger would sit politely, waiting for his share. It didn't matter if Daniel gave commands or called him away. Ranger stayed with Lily until she finished her stories, only standing up when she closed the book and waved goodbye. However, there was one moment that truly revealed the depth of their connection, a moment many people have forgotten by the time the funeral took place. It happened one winter afternoon when the ground was covered in snow and the air carried a bite of coldness. Lily had slipped on the icy ground while playing alone in the yard. Her knee scraped badly and she couldn't stand. She cried for help, but her mother was inside cooking and didn't hear. Ranger, who was resting inside Daniel's house, suddenly leaped to his feet and began barking loudly at the back door. Daniel rushed over. thinking Ranger sensed an intruder, but when he opened the door, Ranger bolted toward the fence, barking in urgent, sharp tones. Daniel followed him, confused, until he heard Lily's sobs. Ranger pressed himself against the fence, whining and pawing at it, desperate to reach her. That moment changed everything. Daniel climbed over the fence, picked Lily up, and carried her inside to treat her wound. Even after she was safe, Ranger refused to calm down until he saw her smile again. It was the first time he had defied Daniel's commands, and it wouldn't be the last. From that day on, Lily trusted Ranger not just as a friendly dog, but as her silent guardian. She talked to him the way children talk to their closest confidants, telling him secrets, fears, dreams, and little worries that adults often ignored. Ranger listened with the seriousness of a friend who understood everything she said. And though no one knew the full truth at that time, Lily shared something else with Ranger in those quiet afternoons. Something she couldn't bring herself to tell any adult yet. Something that would later explain why Ranger reacted so fiercely at her funeral. But back then, everyone simply thought it was sweet to see a little girl whispering into a dog's ear while he leaned gently against her. Lily's mother admired the bond, often saying that Ranger made her daughter feel safe. She told Daniel that Lily slept better on nights when Ranger had visited her through the fence. The dog's presence was calming, like a protective shield. As for Daniel, he never questioned their connection. He believed Ranger simply liked the little girl's innocent nature. But slowly, he began noticing small changes that hinted at something deeper. Ranger became unusually alert whenever Lily played outside. He paced the yard when she walked home from school, watching every passing car. He barked at strangers who lingered near the street, even when they seemed harmless. Daniel once joked, "It's like you think she's your puppy protect." But Ranger's expression remained serious, his instincts sharpened by something only he sensed. One particular memory haunted Daniel during the funeral. A week before Lily's death, she had run to the fence, clutching Ranger's fur through the wooden gaps. She looked frightened, her eyes darting toward the street, where an unfamiliar van had parked. She leaned close to Ranger and whispered into his ear. Ranger stiffened immediately, his muscles tightening, his eyes narrowing as if he recognized something dangerous. Daniel had seen that behavior only during high-risk police searches. But Lily's mother brushed it off as childhood imagination, and Daniel assumed she was nervous about something she saw online or heard at school. But now, after everything, he wondered if that moment was far more important than they realized. The town saw Ranger's grief at the funeral and thought it was simply loyalty. But the truth was more complex. Ranger wasn't just mourning Lily. He wasn't just sorrowful. He was holding on to something he had known for longer than any human. Something Lily had trusted him with. Something he felt responsible for. Something that tied his heart to hers in ways words could never explain. At the funeral, no one understood why Ranger refused to leave the coffin. But anyone who had witnessed their bond over the years would have known. Ranger wasn't only saying goodbye. He was standing guard, just as he always had. And deep inside his loyal heart, he knew that Lily's story wasn't over yet. Not until he revealed the truth she had once whispered to him through the wooden fence. The day everything went wrong began like any ordinary morning, bright and peaceful under the warm daylight. Birds chirped from the rooftops. Neighbors watered their gardens, and Lily skipped down the porch steps with a carefree joy that made her seem like a little beam of sunlight. She wore her favorite yellow dress with tiny white flowers and carried her small blue backpack decorated with stickers. But even with her cheerful smile, something deep in her eyes seemed unsettled. Daniel noticed it when he waved at her from his yard, while Ranger bounded excitedly toward the fence, ready for their usual morning greeting. Lily smiled at them both, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It held a kind of hesitation, as if she were thinking about something she didn't want to say out loud. Ranger, always sensitive to emotions, tilted his head and stepped closer, sniffing the air around her as if searching for something wrong. Lily crouched down and hugged him tightly, whispering in his ear before running off to school. Daniel saw the whisper, but couldn't hear her words. Later, he would replay that moment in his mind over and over, wishing he had paid more attention. Around lunchtime, the first sign of trouble appeared. Lily's teacher noticed she was missing from her classroom. At first, She thought Lily was in the restroom or at the nurse's office. But when she checked, Lily was nowhere to be found. Panic spread quickly through the school. Calls were made to her mother, who immediately left work and rushed toward the school building with fear gripping her heart. Daniel, who was on patrol nearby, received the emergency call and sped toward the scene with Ranger already growling anxiously in the back seat. When they arrived, the schoolyard was filled with worried teachers and crying children. Lily's mother was trembling, barely able to speak. She kept repeating, "She was just here this morning. She was just here." Daniel tried to stay calm, but he felt a sinking heaviness as he looked down at Ranger, who was pacing in circles, barking sharply, his instincts already telling him that something terrible had happened. Without waiting for a command, Ranger lowered his nose to the ground, sniffing for Lily's scent. He caught it instantly and began pulling Daniel across the school grounds with determination that made the officers step aside. Ranger led them past the playground, past a row of bushes near the sidewalk, and out toward the edge of the woods behind the school. The deeper they went, the more erratic Ranger's movements became. Something here terrified him. It wasn't just Lily's scent he smelled. There was fear mixed into it, a scent he had learned to recognize on countless rescue missions. Lily had been afraid. Daniel called for backup as Ranger lunged forward, dragging him to an old shed hidden behind a cluster of trees. The wooden door was slightly open, and Ranger forced his head inside, barking furiously until Daniel pulled it wide. Inside, curled in the corner, was Lily. Her small body trembled violently, her cheeks streaked with dried tears. She lifted her head when she saw Ranger and immediately reached out for him, sobbing into his fur, as if he were the only safe thing in the world. Daniel wrapped his jacket around her and carried her out, but Lily refused to let go of Ranger. She clung to him with a desperation that made Daniel's heart twist painfully. When he tried to ask her what happened, she shook her head and whispered, "I don't want him to hear me." Those words haunted him deeply, even before he understood their meaning. Later that evening, Lily's mother tried asking again, but Lily stayed quiet. She lay in bed with Ranger curled beside her through the fence. His muzzle pressed her hand through the wooden gaps. She whispered something into his ear, a secret just for him, and Ranger's body stiffened in the same way Daniel saw at the funeral. His eyes narrowed, his ears perked, and a low growl vibrated from his throat, as if he had recognized a threat close by. Daniel watched from his porch, wondering if he should intervene. But before he could speak, Lily pulled her hand back and gave Ranger a gentle smile, one filled with sadness and trust. She whispered, "You'll protect me, right?" And Ranger responded by pushing his nose against the fence, giving a small whine that sounded almost like a promise. The next days grew heavier. Lily became quieter, less cheerful, and easily frightened. She avoided the windows, jumped at sudden noises, and refused to walk home from school alone. Her mother called the police station asking for extra patrol near the school, but with limited officers available, there wasn't much they could do except keep an eye on things. Daniel noticed Ranger becoming restless and tense. At night, the dog paced near the back door and growled at the slightest movement outside. Something or someone was disturbing his instincts, and Daniel sensed that whatever Lily had whispered into Ranger's ear had a serious meaning, something Lily feared saying aloud. Then came the day that changed everything forever. Lily collapsed suddenly while coloring in her bedroom, the crayon scattering across the floor as her body fell limp. Her mother screamed for help, calling an ambulance with trembling fingers. Daniel and Ranger rushed to the house as sirens approached, but by the time Lily was loaded into the ambulance, her breathing was weak, her pulse unstable. Ranger tried climbing into the ambulance, but the paramedics held him back. He howled, a long, broken sound that cut through the neighborhood and made Daniel's chest tighten. Ranger knew. He didn't need a doctor to explain. Something terrible had already taken hold of Lily, and he sensed the danger too late. As the ambulance sped away, Ranger didn't stop howling. He paced, barked, scratched at the ground, and refused to leave the street until Daniel forced him inside. Daniel didn't know then that this day wasn't just the day everything went wrong. It was also the day Ranger realized Lily's whispered secret was more serious than any of them imagined. And though no one knew it yet, this was only the beginning of a truth that would shock every officer at her funeral. The night before Lily's death was one of those evenings that felt strangely heavy, as if the air itself carried a warning no one could interpret. The houses on the street stood quietly under the soft glow of the setting sun, and families prepared for dinner, unaware that something tragic was slowly unfolding behind one of the warm-lit windows. Inside Lily's home, her mother Emma noticed that her daughter had been unusually silent all afternoon. She sat curled on the couch, holding her favorite stuffed elephant against her chest, staring at the floor as if trapped deep inside her thoughts. Her once bright smile had faded into a distant expression of fear, the kind that made a parent's heart ache because it signaled a worry a child should never have to carry. Emma tried asking her questions, tried offering her snacks, tried playing her favorite cartoon, but Lily barely responded. She kept glancing out the window toward the street, her small fingers gripping the stuffed toy tightly whenever a car passed by. Meanwhile, just next door, Daniel noticed Ranger behaving just as oddly. Ranger wasn't resting like he usually did in the early evenings. Instead, he paced back and forth across the living room floor, whining under his breath, occasionally stopping to put his paws against the back door, as if begging to be let out. His ears twitched at every noise outside, and his eyes were constantly fixed in the direction of Lily's house. Daniel tried calming him down, but Ranger was restless in a way that made him uneasy. It wasn't the kind of alertness Ranger had during normal patrol nights. This felt personal, emotional, even frantic. Daniel knew something was wrong, but without knowing what, he could only watch the dog with growing concern. Not long after, there was a soft knock at Daniel's door. When he opened it, he saw Emma standing there with Lily beside her. The little girl looked pale, almost fragile, her hand tightly clutching her mother's coat, as if letting go would send her into danger. Lily whispered, "I want to see Ranger," her voice trembling. Daniel stepped aside, and the moment Ranger saw her, he rushed forward, pressing his body against her legs in protective urgency. Lily knelt down, wrapping her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur, as if she were hiding from something she couldn't escape. Ranger stood completely still, but the stiffness in his muscles told Daniel that the dog sensed much more than he did. Emma apologized for coming unannounced, explaining that Lily had woken from a nightmare so severe that she refused to stay inside unless she could see Ranger. But Daniel could tell this was not just a fear of a nightmare. Something deeper, something heavier was haunting her. "Do you want to talk about it, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Lily shook her head quickly and hugged Ranger even tighter. Daniel exchanged a worried glance with Emma. He wished he could understand what Lily had whispered to Ranger in the days leading up to the incident at the shed, but Lily seemed afraid to repeat it. The only one she trusted with that secret was the loyal dog, now trembling beneath her hands. After a few minutes, Lily loosened her grip and slowly reached into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out a small yellow ribbon, the same color as her favorite clothes, and tied it carefully around Ranger's collar. Her hands shook as she worked, but she tried to smile. "This is for you," she whispered softly, her voice cracking. Ranger leaned into her touch, sensing the heaviness behind her small gesture. When she finished tying the ribbon, she placed her forehead gently against his and closed her eyes, breathing slowly as if gathering strength. Daniel felt something in his chest tighten at the sight. It looked like a goodbye, even though no one spoke the word. Emma decided to take Lily home shortly after, but before they left, Lily turned back toward Ranger with a haunted expression that chilled Daniel to the core. She said, "Stay close, okay?" Her voice trembled with fear that didn't belong in a child's heart. Ranger barked softly in response, a deep, comforting sound, but he also took a step forward as if refusing to let her go. Emma thanked Daniel again and guided Lily back toward their house. But even after the door closed, Ranger refused to calm down. He sat rigidly by the window facing Lily's home, his body tense, his eyes fixed on their porch as if guarding her from afar. That night, as darkness settled over the town, the uneasy quiet grew thicker. Ranger refused to lie down, instead pacing around the house like a restless shadow. Daniel sat nearby, unable to shake the feeling that something important was happening just beyond his understanding. Around midnight, Ranger suddenly stopped pacing and lifted his head sharply, staring toward Lily's home with a growl rumbling in his chest. Daniel quickly walked to the window and looked outside, but saw nothing except the dim porch light and the quiet street. Still, Ranger remained frozen in place, his eyes piercing the darkness as if seeing something Daniel could not. The growl grew deeper, more threatening, the kind Ranger only used when danger was close. Daniel reached for his phone, debating whether to check on Emma and Lily, but before he'd take a step, Ranger let out a mournful, trembling howl, one that Daniel had never heard from him before. The sound sliced through the night, and at that very moment, Daniel's phone rang. It was Emma. Her voice was broken, shaking uncontrollably as she managed to say, "Daniel, it's Lily." "Something's wrong." She collapsed. Daniel's heart dropped. He grabbed his keys and rushed out the door with Ranger following so closely he nearly tripped over him. But when the ambulance arrived minutes later, the paramedics wouldn't allow Ranger inside. The dog howled again, louder this time, as if begging them not to take her away. Neighbors woke to the sound and peeked through windows, watching the heartbreaking scene unfold. As the ambulance sped down the street with sirens screaming, Ranger stood in the middle of the road, staring after Lily as though his world had slipped away. Daniel placed a hand on the dog's back, feeling the tremors of fear and desperation shaking through him. He didn't understand what had happened, but he knew that Lily had tried to warn them. Something had terrified her. Something had caused her collapse. And Ranger, the loyal K9 who loved her more than anyone realized, had sensed danger long before any human could. That night, beneath the cold glow of the streetlights, Daniel felt the chilling certainty that Lily's story was far from over, and that Ranger held a piece of the truth no one else could see. The days after Lily's death were filled with numb silence, unanswered questions, and a grief so heavy it settled over the town like a thick fog that refused to lift. People struggled to make sense of how a lively little girl could suddenly collapse without warning, and while the doctors searched for explanations, nothing they said brought comfort. But among all the broken hearts, no one grieved more visibly than Ranger. Since the funeral, he had hardly eaten, barely slept, and refused to leave the coffin until Daniel physically carried him away. Even after being taken home, Ranger sat for hours staring at Lily's house, his eyes hollow, his ears constantly twitching at every sound as if still expecting her small footsteps to appear at the fence. Daniel had never seen him like this. Ranger wasn't just mourning. He was guarding something, waiting for something, or holding on to a secret only he understood. Daniel felt helpless watching him suffer, but he had no idea how to help a dog whose heart seemed shattered. On the morning after Lily was buried, the police officers gathered to accompany Daniel to the cemetery to pay respects and check on Ranger, who had once again broken free from the backyard and run straight to Lily's grave. When they arrived, the sight froze them where they stood. Ranger was lying on the grave, his paws stretched across the white coffin lid just below the soil, his head resting where Lily's hands would have been. His eyes were half closed but alert, and his nose twitched every time someone stepped near, as if he dared anyone to disturb her resting place. Daniel approached quietly, kneeling beside him, whispering soft words, but Ranger didn't move. He kept his body pressed against the earth above Lily, guarding her with a determination that was both heartbreaking and unsettling. People watching from a distance felt chills, not because it was eerie, but because the dog's loyalty was deeper than human understanding. But everything changed when a man walked into the cemetery that morning. His name was Hugo, a quiet neighbor who lived 3 houses down from Lily. He rarely spoke to anyone, rarely appeared in public, and wasn't known to have any connection to the little girl. Yet there he was, standing stiffly among the mourners, his hands shoved into his pockets, his eyes shifting uneasily from the grave to the officers. No one thought much of him, until Ranger suddenly lifted his head. The transformation was so immediate and so violent that Daniel jumped back in shock. Ranger's ears snapped upward, his eyes narrowed into razor-sharp focus, and a deep, threatening growl rumbled from his chest. Within seconds, he leaped to his feet, teeth bared, fur rising along his spine like a storm-gathering force. Before Daniel could react, Ranger lunged forward, sprinting straight toward Hugo with a fury no one had ever seen from him before. The officers yelled commands, but Ranger ignored everything. He collided with Hugo, knocking him backward into grass and pinning him down with unbelievable strength. Hugo screamed, terrified, struggling beneath the weight of the raging canine. Daniel and the others rushed to pull Ranger off, but the dog refused to let go, snapping and barking with a rage so primal it shook everyone to their core. Ranger wasn't confused. He wasn't reacting out of grief. He was attacking with intention, as if he had finally found something he had been searching for since the day Lily disappeared behind the shed. When they finally managed to pull Ranger away, Hugo scrambled to his feet, his face pale, sweat running down his temples. He stuttered excuses, saying he just came to pay respects, but his trembling voice and darting eyes told a different story. The officers didn't trust him. Ranger never behaved this way without reason. Daniel knew his partner's instincts were always sharp and always right. So, despite Hugo's protests, they decided to question him and escort him home. Ranger followed closely, growling every time Hugo looked back. Inside Hugo's small, dimly lit house, the officers began searching for anything suspicious, while Hugo claimed ignorance. He insisted he had nothing to do with Lily, and that the dog must have mistaken him. But Ranger walked through the house with calculated precision, sniffing corners, checking hallways, his body stiff and alert. Then suddenly he stopped at a bedroom door. His lips curled back, his muscles tightening as he stared at the doorknob with a hatred that frightened even Daniel. When the officers opened the door, Ranger pushed inside immediately. What they found froze them. On the desk lay printed photographs. Photos of Lily at school, Lily walking home, Lily at the playground. Some of the photos were taken from a distance, others disturbingly close. Next to the photos were notes scribbled in shaky handwriting. Follow her, don't lose sight, and find the right moment. The more they searched, the more disturbing the discoveries became. In the trash bin was an empty bottle of chemicals with a warning label, the same rare toxin the hospital later found traces of in Lily's blood. Ranger sniffed the bottle and growled again, confirming with absolute certainty that the scent matched the one he had smelled on Lily the day she was found hiding in the woods. It all became painfully clear. Lily hadn't imagined the man near the school. She hadn't mistaken the strange van. She hadn't been overly fearful. She had been followed, watched, hunted, and the secret she whispered into Ranger's ear that day near the fence was the truth she was too scared to voice aloud. The man who frightened her was Hugo. She had recognized his voice or his footsteps or his scent when he tried talking to her near the playground. And Ranger, loyal to the very end, had understood her warning even if he couldn't express it in words. When the officers confronted Hugo with the evidence, he panicked and tried to run. But Ranger blocked his escape, forcing him to ground until cuffs were slapped onto his wrists. Hugo was arrested that same afternoon. The police later discovered he had been stalking Lily for months. He watched her routines, noted her favorite paths, studied her schedule, and when he realized people were becoming suspicious, he acted. The toxin found in his home proved he had attempted to poison her gradually, waiting for the moment she would be alone again. Lily never got the chance to speak the truth herself. But Ranger, faithful, fearless, and driven by love, did what no human could. He held on to her secret, protected her memory, and led the officers to the monster responsible for her death. And by doing so, he ensured that Lily received the justice she deserved. In the days following Hugo's arrest, the entire town fell into a strange silence, a silence mixed with relief, sorrow, and disbelief. The truth behind Lily's death had spread quickly, leaving people shaken to the core. Parents held their children closer. Teachers walked students to their cars, and neighbors who once nodded politely at each other now exchanged long, worried glances. But while the community grappled with a horrifying revelation, Ranger remained caught between two worlds. The world where Lily once laughed, played, and read stories of the fence, and the world where her absence now echoed in every empty corner he looked toward. Ranger did not understand the legal details or the paperwork that followed Hugo's capture, but he understood the most important part. The dangerous man who haunted Lily was no longer free. Still, that knowledge did nothing to heal the wound left inside him. Nothing erased the memory of her small hand tangled in his fur. Nothing softened the loneliness that pressed on his chest when he walked to the fence and found only silence where her voice once filled his days. Daniel watched him with heavy eyes, unable to ignore how dramatically his loyal partner had changed. Ranger, once energetic, brave, and obedient, now carried himself with slow, dragging steps, as if each movement reminded him of the little girl he had loved and lost. He spent hours lying near the fence, staring at Lily's darkened house. At night, he woke suddenly, pacing restlessly, letting out soft whimpers that tore at Daniel's heart. It was clear Ranger was grieving just as deeply as any human would, and perhaps even more fiercely. Daniel tried sitting beside him, offering comfort, but Ranger kept returning to the same place, drawn to the one memory he couldn't let go. Every so often, Daniel would whisper, "She's safe now, boy." But the words felt empty. Ranger didn't want safety. He wanted Lily. A week later, the town arranged a small memorial service, a chance for those who loved Lily to gather again, this time in peace rather than confusion. Emma, still fragile from grief, requested that the ceremony be simple. She said she wanted Lily to be remembered as the bright, sweet child she was, not as a victim of something so dark. Daniel asked if he could bring Ranger, worried it might be too painful for the dog, but Emma shook her head firmly. "Ranger should be there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He protected her better than any of us. He deserves to say goodbye in peace." And so, on a warm morning filled with soft daylight and the quiet rustle of wind through trees, Ranger walked beside Daniel toward Lily's resting place. The moment Ranger saw the small gravestone painted with Lily's favorite yellow flowers, his body went still. For a long time, he just stood there, breathing softly, staring as if waiting for her to run around the corner laughing like she used to. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he moved forward and lowered himself onto the ground. He pressed his nose against the cool stone, closed his eyes as though absorbing every memory he had of her. The whispered secrets, the warm hugs, the little ribbon she tied around his collar on that final night. People watching wiped their tears. It wasn't just a dog mourning a child. It was a soul saying goodbye to another soul that had changed his world. Emma approached with shaky hands and knelt beside Ranger. She touched his head gently, her tears falling onto his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for loving her. Thank you for trying to protect her." Ranger lifted his head slightly, pressing it into her palm, sensing the same emptiness inside her that lived inside him. Emma then placed a small object beside the gravestone, a yellow ribbon identical to the one Lily had tied around Ranger. "She wanted you to feel brave," Emma murmured. "And you were." Daniel watched quietly from behind, overwhelmed by emotion. Ranger's presence had brought comfort to Emma and closure to the town. But for Ranger, this moment was something deeper, a final promise kept. But the story did not end there. A few days after the memorial, Daniel received a message from Emma asking him to visit her home. He brought Ranger with him, unsure of the reason. When they arrived, Emma handed Daniel her phone with trembling fingers. "I found something," she whispered. "Something Lily recorded weeks ago. Something you should hear." Daniel hesitated before pressing play, but when he did, Lily's soft voice filled the room. The recording was shaky, as if captured late at night, but her words were clear enough to silence everyone who listened. "If something happens to me," Lily whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "Ranger will know why. He will help you. He always listens. He always knows." The recording ended, leaving Daniel breathless. Emma lifted a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. Ranger sat at her feet, ears perked, recognizing Lily's voice and letting out a small, heartbreaking whine. In that moment, Daniel understood something profound. Ranger hadn't just reacted at the funeral because of grief. He wasn't just mourning Lily. He was fulfilling a promise Lily trusted him with, a promise she knew he would keep even if she could not speak for herself. Ranger had been her protector, her confidant, her silent guardian. And in her final days, she had trusted him with the one truth she couldn't bring herself to tell the adults: the name of the man who frightened her. Ranger had carried that truth in his heart until it led them to Hugo. He didn't just mourn Lily's death. He completed her final message. News spread quickly about the dog who solved the mystery, and soon Ranger became a symbol of courage and loyalty throughout the country. People sent letters, gifts, and messages of admiration to the police station, praising the extraordinary bond between a little girl and AK-9, who refused to let her story disappear. But Ranger didn't care about fame or recognition. All he wanted was to feel Lily close again, and though she was gone, her voice, her scent, and her memory stayed alive inside him, guiding him forward. Later that evening, Daniel took Ranger to Lily's grave one last time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm colors that Lily would have loved. Ranger lay beside the gravestone, resting peacefully in a way he hadn't since the tragedy began. Daniel knelt beside him and whispered softly, "You did it, buddy. You gave her justice. You kept your promise." Ranger closed his eyes, letting out a long, deep breath, as if releasing the weight he had carried for so long. It wasn't goodbye. It was a beginning of peace. The town would forever remember Lily, and they would forever honor the dog who refused to leave her side until the truth was revealed.